Instead of leaving the canyon the way we had come in, Don Juan made a detour. We climbed the side of the mountain and ended up in some hills very far from the mouth of the canyon. We walked in dead silence to his house. It was already dark by the time we got there. "I have the proper thing for you to do," Don Juan said to me as soon as I woke up the next morning. "You will start it today. There isn't much time, you know." "What was the string you played, Don Juan?" "A spirit catcher. Mine is a wild boar. When you get one, you will realize that it is alive and can teach you the different sounds it likes. With practice, you will get to know your spirit catcher so well that together you will make sounds full of power." "Why did you take me to look for the spirit of the waterhole, Don Juan?" "You'll know that very soon." Around 10 o'clock the next morning, Don Juan took his pipe out of its sheath, filled it with smoking mixture, then handed it to me and told me to carry it to the bank of the stream. Don Juan made me smoke twice the amount I had smoked during previous attempts. At a given moment, he leaned over and whispered in my right ear that he was going to teach me how to use the water in order to move. I tried to focus my gaze on the water, but its movement distracted me. My mind and my eyes began to wander onto other features of the immediate surroundings. Don Juan bobbed my head up and down and ordered me again to gaze only at the water and not to think at all. He said it was difficult to stare at the moving water and that one had to keep on trying. I tried 3 times, and every time I became distracted by something else. Don Juan very patiently shook my head every time. Finally, I noticed that my mind and my eyes were focusing on the water. In spite of its movement, I was becoming immersed in my view of its liquidness. The water became slightly different. It seemed to be heavier and uniformly grayish-green. I could notice the ripples it made as it moved. The ripples were extremely sharp. And then suddenly I had the sensation that I was not looking at a mass of moving water, but at a picture of water. What I had in front of my eyes was a frozen segment of the running water. The ripples were immobile. I could look at every one of them. Then they began to acquire a green phosphorescence, and a sort of green fog oozed out of them. The fog expanded in ripples, and as it moved, its greenness became more brilliant, until it was a dazzling radiance that covered everything. "Look at the water in front of you," I heard him saying, "but don't let its sound carry you anywhere. If you let the sound of the water carry you, I may never be able to find you and bring you back. Now get into that green fog and listen to my voice." I heard and understood him with extraordinary clarity. I began looking at the water fixedly and had a very peculiar sensation of physical pleasure, an itch, an undefined happiness. For an instant I saw the fizzling as a slow expansion of green matter. It was a silent explosion. The water burst into a brilliant green mist which expanded until it had enveloped me. I remained suspended in it until a very sharp, sustained, shrill noise shook everything. The fog seemed to congeal into the usual features of the water's surface. The shrill noise was Don Juan yelling, "Hey!" close to my ear. He told me to pay attention to his voice and go back into the fog and wait there until he called me. I said okay in English and heard the cackling noise of his laughter. "Please don't talk," he said. "Don't give me any more okays." I could hear him very well. The sound of his voice was melodious and above all friendly. I knew that without thinking. It was a conviction that struck me and then passed. Don Juan's voice ordered me to focus all my attention on the fog but not abandon myself to it. He said repeatedly that a warrior did not abandon himself to anything, not even to his death. I became immersed in the mist again and noticed that it was not fog at all, or at least it was not what I conceived fog to be like. The fog-like phenomenon was composed of tiny bubbles, round objects that came into my field of vision and moved out of it with a quality. I watched their movement for a while, then a loud, distant noise jolted my attention and I lost my capacity to focus and could no longer perceive the tiny bubbles. All I was aware of then was a green, amorphous, fog-like glow. I heard the loud noise again, and the jolt it gave dispelled the fog at once, and I found myself looking at the water of the irrigation ditch. Then I heard it again, much closer. It was Don Juan's voice. He was telling me to pay attention to him, because his voice was my only guide. He ordered me to look at the bank of the stream and at the vegetation directly in front of me. After a few moments, Don Juan ordered me to return to the fog and asked me again to pay attention to his voice, because he was going to guide me so I could learn how to move. He said that once I saw the bubbles, I should board one of them and let it carry me. I obeyed him and was at once surrounded by the green mist, and then I saw the tiny bubbles. Don Juan's voice kept on urging me to follow one of them and mount it. I wondered how I was supposed to do that, and automatically I voiced the word, "how." I felt that the word was very deep inside me, and as it came out, it carried me to the surface. The word was like a buoy that emerged out of my depth. I heard myself saying, "How?" and I sounded like a dog howling. Don Juan howled back, also like a dog, and then he made some coyote sounds and laughed. I thought it was very funny, and I actually laughed. Don Juan told me very calmly to let myself become affixed to a bubble by following it. "Go back again," he said. "Go into the fog. Into the fog." I went back and noticed that the movement of the bubbles had slowed down, and they had become as large as basketballs. I viewed them as if I were looking through a window. That is, the frame of the window did not allow me to follow them, but only permitted me to view them coming into and going out of my field of perception. When I ceased to view them as bubbles, however, I was capable of following them. In the act of following them, I became affixed to one of them, and I floated with it. I truly felt I was moving. In fact, I was the bubble, or that thing which resembled a bubble. Then I heard the shrill sound of Don Juan's voice. It jolted me, and I lost my feeling of being it. The sound was extremely frightening. It was a remote voice, very metallic, as if he were talking through a loudspeaker. I made out some of the words. "Look at the banks," he said. I saw a very large body of water. The water was rushing. I could hear the noise it made. "Look at the banks." Don Juan ordered me again. I saw a concrete wall. The sound of the water became terribly loud. The sound engulfed me. Then it ceased instantaneously, as if it had been cut off. I had the sensation of blackness, of sleep. I became aware that I was immersed in the irrigation ditch. Don Juan was splashing water in my face as he hummed. Then he submerged me in the ditch. He pulled my head up over the surface and let me rest it on the bank as he held me by the back of my shirt collar. Don Juan told me to come out. I noticed an urgency in his voice. "I'm green," I said. "Cut it out," he said imperatively. "You have no time. Get out of there. The water is about to trap you. Get out of it. Out! Out!" I panicked and jumped out. "This time you must tell me everything that took place," he said matter-of-factly, as soon as we sat facing each other inside his room. He was not interested in the sequence of my experience. He wanted to know only what I had encountered when he told me to look at the bank. He was interested in details. I described the wall I had seen. "You moved very fast," he said. "As fast as a man who knows how to perform this technique. I had a hard time keeping up with you." "You mean, Don Juan, that I really traveled in the water?" "You did, and very far, too." "How far?" "You wouldn't believe it." I tried to coax him into telling me, but he dropped the subject and said he had to leave for a while. Don Juan returned the next day late in the afternoon. In the meantime, I had written down everything I could recollect about my perceptions. When Don Juan arrived at his house in the late afternoon, I accosted him and insisted on reading my account to him. He refused to listen and made me sit down. He sat facing me. He was not smiling. He seemed to be thinking, judging by the penetrating look in his eyes, which were fixed above the horizon. "I think you must be aware by now," he said in a tone that was suddenly very severe, "that everything is mortally dangerous. The water is as deadly as the guardian. If you don't watch out, the water will trap you. It nearly did that yesterday. But in order to be trapped, a man has to be willing. There's your trouble. You're willing to abandon yourself." I did not know what he was talking about. His attack on me had been so sudden that I was disoriented. I raised the point that it was humanly impossible to be controlled at all times. He maintained that for a warrior there was nothing out of control. I brought up the idea of accidents and said that what happened to me at the water canal could certainly be classed as an accident, since I neither meant it nor was I aware of my improper behavior. I talked about different people who had misfortunes that could be explained as accidents. "All I can say to you," Don Juan said, "is that a warrior is never available. Never is he standing on the road waiting to be clobbered. Thus he cuts to a minimum his chances of the unforeseen. What you call accidents are most of the time very easy to avoid, except for fools who are living helter-skelter. It is not possible to live strategically all the time," I said. "Imagine that someone is waiting for you with a powerful rifle with a telescopic sight. He could spot you accurately 500 yards away. What would you do?" Don Juan looked at me with an air of disbelief and then broke into laughter. "What would you do?" I urged him. "If someone is waiting for me with a rifle with a telescopic sight," he said, obviously mocking me, "if someone is hiding out of sight waiting for you, you won't have a chance. You can't stop a bullet." "No, I can't, but I still don't understand your point." "My point is that all your strategy cannot be of any help in a situation like that.